my opening gambit is saying, although I'm talking about the future, it's something that actually frightens me quite a bit. Obviously today I'm in the presence of the kind of academic and intelligence community elite, but I'm here today talking from the perspective of a normal person, concerned with the experience of everyday life, not these sort of large systems in and of themselves, but more about how those systems can come to affect our experience of the city, how we deal with each other on a day-to-day basis. I think, you know, that there's a kind of feeling of fear in society that we've kind of lost control of the future, that a lot of the decisions that are being made on behalf of us are leading us into a world which could threaten our quality of life, if not our very existence. And there are many big projects happening in the world related to that. On the one hand, you have ones that are mostly can be seen as to be in the common good, like the project to reduce our carbon footprint and to get us in line with the planet, and some which seem a little bit less clear, like our mobilization of mechanized warfare. And then, of course, you have big data and surveillance and this need to kind of quantify and collect information all the time. That's another big project to try and quantify everything. But I think one of the most interesting projects from a design perspective, and one that's most relevant to our experience of everyday life, is this project of merging the physical and digital together, seeing how what kind of problems and opportunities can emerge from that. And it's really unclear how that's going to turn out, how data is going to be integrated into this world. And so that's a really exciting place to work as a designer, and where I've chosen to site my work. So yeah, I'm going to show you a few different bits of my work today, including, as Roger said, hyperreality. But the thread that runs between them, even though they're in very different mediums, is that they all try and explore this area of the intersection of the virtual and physical, and also thinking about how big data, or data in general, can play a role in shaping our experience of the city. This is a project called Cell that I did actually way back in 2010. This is a project where we were interested in thinking about this idea of a digital aura. And what I mean about that is that every person in this room has an identity online, which is linked to them somehow through uploads that they've made, updates they've made to their social media profiles, anything that they've clicked like on online, they've linked that data to themselves. Even on a kind of less conscious level, search histories, many other things that make up a sort of online profile, which is visible to various extents by other people. This installation is a kind of speculative and provocative piece which aims to kind of visualize that cloud of information and map that onto to your body. So it's kind of a virtual mirror that, instead of showing your physical self, shows your virtual identity. We're really interested to sort of think about, if you could draw sort of lines in physical space to show connections between people, and trying to provoke a conversation about what this would mean to people and their communications with each other if it was available to see all the time. This project's called Prism. It's done for the London Design Festival in 2012. With this project, I was really interested about urban informatics and looking at the city not just as a site for, glass and concrete buildings, roads, but trying to think of it as an environment for machines, for computer interactions, for networks. So Prism is attempting to be a lens into the kind of second virtual city, which is all around us all the time, but we don't normally perceive. So it draws data from, live data from, I think, 55 different sources in London. I think there's lots of information from the Transport for London. That's the one with the little bicycles on it, is a map of the percentage of the cycle hire bikes that are out at any one moment. But we also had information from environmental factors, such as the concentration of various pollutants, the level of the Thames, the London Stock Exchange. And down here on the left, you can see there's a, you can't quite see, but it's a door with the number 10 on it. That's the live energy consumption of 10 Downing Street. So we're able to actually see register on the installation in real time when the kettle turns on in 10 Downing Street. We can see that. So it's just a sort of way of trying to reframe our understanding of the city. And it's not supposed to be a way of analyzing that data, but more of a way of just being able to make it into something tangible. But yeah, Prism was installed in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and it was in the tallest tower, which is just as you go into the entrance, which is quite an amazing site that they just opened up specifically for the exhibition. It had never been used before for exhibiting anything. So one of the challenges was getting everything up there, which had to be winched like 30 meters up through the center of the museum. But one of the nicest things as well is that you're able to walk up and look out onto the roof, go onto the roof of the V&A and see over London. So you had this kind of stacking of views, the virtual view underneath and the physical view on top. This one I do need sound for. Maybe not quite that much sound. This is an installation we did to accompany a performance of The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky. It was part of the 100th year anniversary of the composition of the piece, and we were invited to create a visual component to that performance. Our idea was to turn each one of the instruments' performances into data and express that into the space. So we wired each, we put a sensor on each instrument in the space and linked that directly to a laser that would come on in various intensities depending on how loud that musician was playing. So you can see in the space a kind of direct spatialization of the performance itself. So we didn't do any programming on this. It was being performed by the orchestra. But the main thing I want to talk to you today about today is a project that's older than any of these. It's one that I started in my Masters of Architecture, I think around 4 years ago now, maybe even more. At the time when I was studying architecture, I was really frustrated that I was unable to engage with the really interesting conversations that were happening around network society, around internet culture, around open source. And I was thinking that, you know, I really wanted to find a way into this. So when I discovered augmented reality, I thought that was a very interesting way into those conversations and being able to deal with them in spatial terms. I think augmented reality, Roger was mentioning the Gartner hype cycle earlier, this kind of curve. I think at the moment, augmented reality is kind of going headlong into the trough of disillusionment. But I still believe that augmented reality has the potential to kind of fundamentally change the way that we construct and consume space. So I'm really interested in its potential to expand the possibilities of spatial design. The type of augmented reality I'm interested in is that of immersive, always-on augmented reality. I think kind of glass has a certain element of being able to put that information up in front of you, but the days of kind of doing like this with your smartphone, I think are over really. The worlds that I'm trying to show in my work are not just about overlaying things with information, but about creating entirely new forms of culture, entirely new forms of media based around space. So today I'm going to show two of my films that I made during my masters, some drawings, and I'll talk to you about what I'm doing now as well. The films are intended to be propositional and critical, and they're supposed to form a counterpoint to those kind of glossy visions of the future you see coming out from a lot of the big tech companies. The idea is to anticipate design challenges and I guess raise questions and provoke debate into how we want our future to be. So without further ado, this is the first film called Domestic Robocop.
ロデオボーイズーモンです新製品は前後左右の動きに上下振り運
Cup of tea. Fill kettle with 2 hot place 1 PG tips tea bag in a clean mug. Good. Now get the skim milk from the refrigerator. Carefully pour boiling water into the mug. You're doing great. While you're waiting for the tea to brew, why not browse some recipe suggestions to help you decide on a dinner that will satisfy your personal
速くなったすごいスピードは遅いから速いまで4段階に調節でき
So I released that film online partway through my masters, and it had a pretty big reaction. I think this one and the one after it have got nearly 2 million hits across YouTube and Vimeo now. And also with that, they provoked a lot of comments, which have been one of the most interesting things to see. I think some people were really excited about the kind of possibilities of augmented reality as I was showing it, but also a lot of people were really horrified about the kind of invasion of privacy and the super saturation of information that was out there. And I thought it was great, actually. When someone made the first comparison to Hitler on YouTube, I was like, yeah, I've made it. But it's really interesting to see how people have taken this and used it to be able to start a conversation, to be able to start talking about these issues, which I believe are very important ones to talk about. And I chose to cite it in the home because I think the home has been, it's this very personal, private, and sensitive space, which makes it a kind of very alluring site for invasion by the media. Obviously, that's been going on a long time, but I think this is kind of an extrapolation of that. And you might conclude from it that our private space would diminish in augmented reality. But the next film kind of argues the opposite, and it shows about how you can take private space and take it into the previously public domain. This one's in 3D. Oh, there we go. So if anyone would like to watch this later at home on their 3D TV, then just give me a shout and I'll send you a...
How are you? You right? How was the trip?
So, the first and most obvious problem that I faced from a design perspective was that of interface. As in, we've got all of this new information out now, and we need new ways to be able to interact with it as well. For those of you who are paying attention in the first film, there was a kind of a keyboard that sort of popped up And the more and more I start to develop the second film, the more I realized that that was a completely preposterous idea, that in this age of kind of mind-bending computing, all of the amazing back-end infrastructure that would be used to power this, and we're still using kind of a typewriter essentially. So I started to think of other ways to be able to modulate and control the world around you. And I found that more than our kind of current computing systems, that the analogy of a cockpit was a really useful one for dealing with information in space. Because in cockpits you have kind of controls which are spatially mapped, that you kind of learn where they are in space, and you're able to then instantly and kind of intuitively understand where certain functions are. I think that that idea of subjective space, about being able to perceive things differently depending on this kind of mediative layer, is something that's really interesting, and I sort of dubbed it subjective space. But it kind of already exists as well. For example, if you walk into a coffee shop and you've got your laptop with you, then the coffee shop doesn't just have to be for drinking coffee or having conversations with your friends. It can also be about having a meeting, getting some work done, playing games. The space can become whatever you want it to be. Likewise, if you've got your phone, you're sitting on the tube, everyone's doing different things on their phone as well. So in architecture, we get taught this kind of famous maxim by the famous architect Mies van der Rohe, and the maxim goes, form follows function. And I think that's applied a lot in design. What it means is that you have to look at the function of what you're building, be that a space or a product or whatever, and fit the form to make sure that it supports that function. So you should design things around what it's used for, basically. But in this world of being able to bring your own device, to use AR, to use a smartphone or a laptop, we can't really understand what the function of a space is anymore. So we have to kind of think about new ways to be able to design space. And if a space can be anything, depending on who's there using it, we arrive at this very, very difficult and very pure question in architecture, which is, what is ideal space? I asked quite a lot of people this, about their opinions on what ideal space might be. Some people came back with some of their favorite buildings or places they've been to that they really enjoyed. Some other people were saying that actually, I wouldn't, even if I was in the city, maybe I'd want to sort of escape and be in nature or something else. And of course, all these things are possible in augmented or virtual reality. But to me, somehow they all seemed a little bit dishonest. Like they were transporting you to a sort of artificial world. So my version of kind of ideal space is this. This is just a photograph I found online, but it's of somebody's workstation. They've customized their environment with books they like, with posters from their travels. You can see on the desktop as well, they've made a custom desktop background. They've got their files kind of lined up, and I'm sure they have some completely idiosyncratic filing structure that no one else can understand. So I think this is an interesting way of thinking about ideal space, that something that isn't necessarily a perfect space, but something which is customized and subjective, and in a way very domestic. This is how that works in the film. The character wakes up and he's in ostensibly he's in his own space, but you actually find out he's in a public space, in a cafe. The augmented city is a bit like Twitter or Facebook. You can't see the whole thing at once. You can't see every user on Facebook's profile, and you wouldn't want to either. You have to find a way to kind of organize and sift through that information. So I see that the augmented city like that it has hundreds of thousands of layers to it, and to see it all at one time would be too much. You wouldn't be able to see anything. So you have to find a way to explore that. And in the films, the way you do that is through this channel browser. So I've imagined that you're able to kind of turn on and off layers of the city to be able to customize your view of it. And in this one, this character is into Georgian architecture, flowers, and street art. And so that's the city he sees. What's quite interesting there is that, rather than seeing each kind of version of the city as a complete reality, we're seeing them as fragments that can be assembled. And what it means is, as you customize the city to what you like, the city itself becomes a reflection of your personality. So everybody in this room would probably have a different view of that. And everybody as well would have a completely unique view of the city. So that process is aggregation, about trying to to take all these things and present them to yourself. But there's an opposite to that as well, which is broadcast, i.e. what you show about yourself to the world. That's something that we later explored in Cell, the installation I showed you first. But I also subsequently did a little collaboration with a fashion designer to talk about how augmented reality and fashion could work together. So we did this kind of triptych of images which use the aesthetics from the clothes, but also taking data from that person's everyday life and presenting that into the world. She's my favorite. She's the kind of a fashion blogger, so she's able to survive by sort of parading the streets and sort of showing off the latest clothes from designers, and she'll be paid sponsorship to be able to do so. So it's kind of a sort of updating of the idea of the sort of Victorian dandy. So now we can't really define space according to function. We can't really define space according to public or private. So we need sort of new terms to replace these previously universal spatial qualities. One of those is, I think, broadcast and aggregation is an interesting sort of dichotomy to look at. But I was also interested in other sort of hybrid spaces that are starting to emerge. One of those, if you look at the image here, these big white squares, that I think is still the biggest screen in the world. It's in the Dallas Cowboys American Football Stadium in Dallas. And when they first launched this screen at the inaugural game, they broadcast the game below in 3D so that you could sit in the stands and put in your glasses and watch this amazing screen while the players play below. At the start, I thought that was completely ridiculous. Like, you don't go to well, I don't go to a football match at all, but you wouldn't go to see something like that just to see something. You want to see the real thing, which is down there. But I realized I was kind of missing the point with that, I think. And that the reason people go to a game like this isn't necessarily to see some like tiny figures running around on the pitch below, but it's really to be in that environment, in the crowd, with all those people, feeling the kind of heat and the noise and the sweat and the excitement that's generated by crowds. And I think augmented reality really understands that very well. So although we think of space at the moment, spatial design is something very static, we could start in the future to look much more about dynamic spaces, which adapt themselves and create like instantaneous events and settings to support different activities. But it also leads us back to who's going to design these future cities. In my opinion, there can be a split in the architectural profession. On one side, you'll have people who are concerned with the kind of physical infrastructure, which will most likely be engineers, planners, and they'll be concerned with economics and logistics and infrastructure. And on the other side, you'll have people who are engaged in the virtual side, which is to do with defining those spatial qualities, making those experiences. And I think those people will have to be grounded not so much in the way we see architecture at the moment, but more in the world of game design or filmmaking, to be able to understand that kind of narrative linear space. These are just some drawings I did to show the different layers of the augmented city. So at the front layer, you've got the white bit, which is the cockpit, and then as you go through, you've got the field, which is all that location-based information which is out there. And then the skin, which is this kind of fixed layer that can be applied over to change the aesthetics of that. And then finally at the back, you've got your actual infrastructure, which can be, ugly and energy efficient. But when we're talking about the construction of the augmented city, we also have to consider the democratizing effects of digital media. In 2010, there's an author called Charlie Leadbeater who wrote this equation, which says more cultural heritage stored in digital form, plus more accessible to more people, plus people better equipped with more tools to add creatively to the collection, equals an exponential growth in mass cultural expression, which he calls cloud culture. What he's saying basically is that he was talking about photography and video and saying that now everyone can be both a producer and consumer of content, then you start to get lots of creativity popping up everywhere. But I'm really interested about what could happen if this idea was applied to space. What if space itself could become a form of media? I think that one interesting benefit of that is that instead of our cities being created by architects, planners, developers, landowners, the cities could actually start to be defined if people could creatively add to the city by the people who live there. and people could come together in groups and communities and start to develop styles which would be associated with different parts of the town or with different cities in general. And it could inspire a new form of kind of augmented reality tourism where people would travel to see that. I think I was interested in Chinatowns at the time, about how a mass populace can come and settle in an area and kind of start to customize that environment to their own end. So I think you can think of the augmented city as being like 1,000 Chinatowns all layered on top of each other. But the reason that I'm presenting this project at all to you today is because at the moment I'm making a new project, which is an extension, an extrapolation of these ideas in a new film series called Hyperreality. Hyperreality is it's an ongoing project. It's going to be 3 short films, like you just saw, each one of them from the perspective of a different protagonist. The films are also, well, I'll go through. Yeah, we funded the first film at the end of last year on Kickstarter, which went very well. And one of the things about the Kickstarter model is that you're giving rewards to people in exchange for their pledges to you. And for the higher tier pledges, we're offering kind of product placement within the films, but instead of just putting a product in there, we'll actually work with those companies to be able to develop futuristic scenarios that their company operates in. So they kind of become more a logical part of that universe. The films are set in Medellin in Colombia, as Roger was saying. Medellin's a really interesting city. I went there for the first time 2 years ago to speak at a conference. But I was really taken with the response from the people in the audience. People were really super engaged with talking about the future of the city. And after talking to them for a while, I realized that the reason of that was that Medellin has got such a dark and troubled past that it can't really cling to that past anymore. And it needs to reach out and try and define a new future for itself. So I found it a really stimulating environment for having discussions. And because of that, I decided to set the new films there. So each of the 3 characters in the films will be existing in the city, but the way they see the city will be completely different. So they'll even sort of meet each other in the films, but you won't necessarily realize that because the viewpoint is so subjective. Some of our crew in the city, and we got a lot of local press attention as well. One of the really nice things about Medellin is the way that they don't really care about painting on cars. We're very kind of precious about our cars here, but it's quite nice, especially the buses. They're all customized, and we went to one of the bus depots because we needed to use it for the film. And they've actually got a guy whose job it is to help bus drivers customize their vehicles. So that's going to make a big appearance in the film. Medellin's trying to sort of escape its past and trying to redefine itself, but it's interesting that to see where the sort of the public persona of the city, which is now kind of center of innovation in South America, sort of gets caught up by its past. This is like one of the final days of shooting. I think it was actually the final shot, and we had quite a complex scene we had a guy on a motorbike, and someone had to get on the motorbike, and then we turned around, and then there was this Virgin Mary prop that we got that we had to use somehow. But as we were shooting the final scene, it was actually the final take. These guys kind of rode up alongside our motorcycle driver who was just down there and just put a gun to his head and said, "Get off the fucking bike." So he got off the bike and they took it. So it was kind of strange that while we're trying to create a new vision of the city, then the city keeps reminding us that it's not always that easy. I mentioned the Virgin Mary earlier. You'd thought it'd be quite hard to find a effigy of the Virgin Mary to sort of rent in Medellin, but it's not at all. There's shops everywhere. We had a very strange kind of, my producers were talking to the shop stuff and trying to like barter down the price of the Virgin Mary by saying that the face was a bit messed up or something. It was a very strange conversation. Skipping through a few things here, but yeah, generally the process goes starting to work in storyboards and then developing those storyboards with the footage. And this is a finished piece of one of the films. It's just one of the scenes that I can show you an exclusive preview of. It's all work in progress, but this is one of the scenes where the character's driving through the augmented city. I guess part of the idea here is to try and think about how smart cities and big data can work together to change the way that we navigate space. In this one, you've got kind of quite a full-on GPS that will direct you not only in the right direction, but in the right lane and everything like that. And what that really means is that the city would be able to the city's operating system would be able to dynamically direct the flow of traffic around it, depending on what's happening at that time. So if there's a big event happening, or even if somebody wants to rent a section of road, it's theoretically possible to do so by moving the traffic around. But from an individual standpoint, for you as a person in that city, it might mean that your commute to work every day could be different, and you might not really even have an understanding of how to get from A to B, or you wouldn't even be able to without this. So, you have it, as always, you have, with the increased efficiency, you also have a trade-off. And in that case, this trade-off is a very different relationship to space and the city. So, no one's asked me to do these projects, and it's a lot of fun to do it, but it's also a lot of work. So, kind of, why do I bother? I think sometimes. But I think it goes back to that fear I was talking about at the beginning, that if you ask people now what the future looks like, people don't really know. That they come back with answers which were sort of around like 100 years ago. It's still flying cars and skyscrapers. So I think it's quite a dangerous thing that we seem to have lost the confidence that we have any impact, or we have any say in the matter of what the future is like. It seems like the future is made by people in Silicon Valley, or these big corporations, or even some of you people that most people don't have access to. But I think that design can be an amazing tool in that matter. I mean, like, designers are very ideological by nature. Everyone wants to make this kind of better world. But change is often driven by ideology. And now we have these amazing tools to be able to create films like this, or distribute them and comment on them and talk about them online. So I think it's, we should be doing more of that, essentially. That we should be making more visions, we should be talking about them more, and hopefully by discussing them, by improving on them, by refining them, by creating different versions entirely, we might be able to get to a more positive understanding of what the future is, rather than just looking towards, the next iPhone. So I think, more than science and technology, more than economics or politics, it can be design that plays a really key role in our creation of the future. So now I'll leave you with that, but thank you very much.